Welcome back to Light Talk, where the paranormal and the supernatural is a part of our everyday life. We have a very special guest for you today. I am excited to have her on the show. She is an author and she's got some experiences I think we'll enjoy. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to hand the mic over to her. So go ahead and introduce yourself and we'll get started. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to kind of share some things that I love to talk about. It's so funny that when you contacted me, I thought it was in reference to my new book, and we didn't even talk about my book, and you didn't even know I had a book coming out. But that was kind of how we got started. So let me just kind of introduce my. Okay, maybe you can see it. I'm an author. I've written 20 books or contributed to over 20 books. And this is a spin-off of a 6-book series that I've published over several years. They are supernatural books. I call them young adult Christian fantasy. They do have a Christian worldview, but it presents it to people that didn't grow up in a church home. I did not grow up in a church home, and I was very resistant, to be honest, to Christian things because I felt very judged by people that were Christians. But the interesting thing is I always felt like there was, like from the time I was very young, there was a huge thunderstorm outside my house, and it was like I knew at 4 years old there had to be something that created that noise. It was too powerful, too great, and it was like I'm sorry, I've got hair getting in my face and it tickles. Anyway, and so that was the time when I first realized there was a God. So it wasn't like I was sitting in a church pew, singing praises or anything. We didn't even own a Bible. And so I just want to start there because I always felt like God had his hand on my life. And through the years, I'm going to skip forward quite a bit here. In my high school years, I came to discover that not everybody, there were like Christians, and I didn't really fit into that crowd. And then there was the crowd that were kind of into things like Ouija boards and stuff. Like I remember going to a seance at school and just weird things. And there was just something about that struck me as I don't feel comfortable with this. So while I didn't grow up in a church home and embrace all those things, I did when I was 12. I can kind of share that. I also didn't embrace this weird stuff. And so the conclusion I came to, there is a spiritual world. Where do I fit into it, and what do I believe? And this is the question that we all have to ask ourselves. What's the truth? And so I found it in the Bible. I felt God talking to me. I read the Bible. I had been around a lot of Jewish people, and I was jealous for their God. I wanted to know who he was. There was something about him that struck me as like the God that I knew when I was 4 years old. But it raised a lot of questions when I saw my friends believing in things that seemed really odd, really weird. So I knew there was a battle. And the question was, what's the truth? And so I think when we start asking those questions, God's going to answer us. There's also the evil one that wants to pretend that he is in charge. And I think that's where the deception comes in. And so, we have to ask ourselves, and that's what I do in this new book, Frequency. What frequency are we operating on? In the spiritual world, there are frequencies, and people operate on different frequencies. And I got to thinking about this as a ham radio operator. I have my extra license, which is the highest rating. And I also do CW at about 25 words a minute, 25 words per minute. And my book is sort of begins with ham radio, but it progresses beyond that. And the reason I named it that is when you're operating the radio, you can only hear on certain frequencies. In other words, you have to tune into the frequency to get the sound back that you are hearing. And if you're a little bit off that frequency, you're not going to hear them. Okay. And so I think as we're operating in this world, there's this huge battle going on in the supernatural. And we have to figure out which frequency we're going to tune into. And I know we've all been around people that are they're downer people. I'm a breast cancer survivor, 8 years. Thank you, Jesus. I was a late stage breast cancer survivor. And I began thinking about, why is it some people I'm around and they encourage me, and other people I'm around and they are not encouraging at all. And so the sense of frequency is all around us. And I think it's a supernatural thing. We don't see frequencies. We don't see those radio waves, okay? But we can tune into them. And so a lot of it is within us, you know. Like, people will read the Bible and they will say, well, I read it and I don't hear anything, I don't see anything. That's because they're not tuned into the frequency that God is operating on. You see what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense. I'm trying to tie this all together in a way to show you that what's really real is the spiritual world is more real than the world we see. You know, in the seventh dimension, in order to meet Jesus, you had to go to a different dimension. And that different dimension was like a parallel universe. And there's 6 books in the series, okay? And basically, you had to go back and meet Jesus at the cross. That's a totally different dimension. It's a spiritual dimension. And in that spiritual dimension, you're fighting demonic activity, you're fighting fallen angels. I mean, that world exists. We just don't see it in this world. The 8th dimension is outside of time, okay? And that's why I named it, because you remember in the Bible, it says God created the heavens and the earth. Well, I am the Alpha and Omega. I'll start there. So the Alpha is before time and the Omega is after time. And so that's where the book begins and ends. Okay, so you have the 7th dimension and then you have the 8th dimension. So, but I think where I want to go with all of this, now that I've made this introduction, and hopefully people are still like figuring out what I'm saying, because I am going somewhere with this. A few years ago, I went for my annual checkup, and he felt, you know, like you know how they do the hands-on stuff, and he says, "Are you pregnant?" I said, "No, I'm not pregnant." He says, "Well, I feel something here," and he was like, "Feels like you're pregnant." I'm like, "I'm not pregnant. I'm divorced." My husband left me for his girlfriend after I put him through medical school. And it's like, you know, no, it's been decades since I've had that kind of life. I'm like, this is crazy. Anyway, so, you know, they wanted to go in and they needed to figure out what was going on. Well, they did a pregnancy test and I was pregnant. I'm like, you got to be kidding, you know? And so I went in for the exploratory surgery and they did the test for like cancer and stuff, like ovarian cancer. It was all negative. And so the morning of the test, the morning of the surgery, they redid the pregnancy test. And this is 2 weeks later, probably a different machine. And it came back positive again. I'm like, this moment, like, maybe this is an immaculate conception. I'm like, no, there's only one of those. And that was Mary. So after the surgery, they did the pathology report. It didn't really make much sense to me. So I asked my doctor when I went in for my follow-up, why did I have a positive pregnancy test? And he just said, oh, the machine was just messed up. He would not talk about it. Well, anyway, I just didn't know what do you do with that? You know, how do you make sense of that? It was just weird. Well, then when I got looking into UFOs, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's well documented, the abduction phenomenon where women are getting abducted and they're doing these medical procedures on them. They're they are taken they're using them for, they, in other words, they take out the ovary and they get it fertilized and then they put it back in the woman. Now, I'm not saying I had that. I have no memory and I've never seen a UFO. But that thought did go through my mind. Maybe I had something and I don't remember it, because why would I be writing about UFOs and be so drawn to understand what's going on if I maybe had an encounter of some sort? And the thing is I could not get pregnant. All those years I was married, I could not get pregnant. So that's what made it really weird.
Yeah.
Is, sir, I have a positive pregnancy test. I was married for 7 years before my husband got his girlfriend pregnant, and I couldn't get pregnant. So I don't have an explanation for that, but that was very strange. And then the other thing that really got me interested in the UFO phenomenon is several years ago, I was asleep and my cat woke me up, and my cat was doing this kind of stuff over me. And I just, as a reflex, I started doing the same thing, had no idea what was going on because I'm still half asleep. And I look up and something flies out of my room. It was black and it flew out of my room. And I'm like, that's weird. It was like my cat was protecting me, you know? And then about a year ago, right before I started working on this book, different cat, I'm asleep, and my cat's making all these weird noises in my room. And I'm like, she woke me up because she was being so verbal. You know how cats can be very verbal if you have a cat. And I'm like, what's going on with my cat? And I look, and there is this 4-foot creature, and he looked kind of like a gray. I think that's what he was. And he walked beside my bed, and I'm like watching this thing to make sure he doesn't come toward me. He would not make eye contact with me. And he walked past me, and he was holding his hand in a weird way. It was like his hand was deformed. And that was the thing that really struck me. What in the world was that? And he walked through the wall and left. And I waited to make sure he didn't come back. I'm like, what was that? And then I just turned over and went back to sleep. Because I'm like, I have the blood of Jesus on me. He can't touch me. He can't do anything. But this is my thought. God knew I was going to write this book. He knew. And it's a book about spiritual warfare, about the truth. Where do we come from? Where are we going? I'm very much a born-again Christian. I love Jesus. And the one thing about these abductions is that women that call out for Jesus, men that, because men have been abducted too, the event ends. It's like they can't process the name of Jesus. It's like this envelope that protects the person. And so I think Satan wanted to scare me from writing this book, and God said, hey, I've got you. You're both times my cat, you know, woke me up, and I feel like God was using the cat. And so interestingly, in this book, there, you can't see it because I've got this.
There he goes.
There's a very important cat in the book. Now, the cat that's in the book, I lived on the shores of Galilee. I went to Israel 2 years ago. And this cat was on the shores of Galilee. It was sort of an older cat, looked like it had had a rough life. She was very loving, and I was feeding the cat, another friend of mine. We were both feeding this cat while we were there for 6 days. And that cat inspired me when I was writing the book to include the cat and the story. And later on, the cat becomes something else, and I'm going to leave that there because I want the reader. But God uses animals in miraculous ways that we don't understand. I think that animals, you know, I think that Adam and Eve could talk to the animals, and they lost that ability when the fall happened, which is really sad. But in my first book, The Door, one of the characters, and the characters are the same in both the 7th dimension and the 8th dimension, they're just written from different points of view. Shell can actually talk to the animals. And they all have different gifts once they, come to know who Jesus is. Because I think God gives us special, unique gifts to fight the warfare that we fight, the spiritual battle that we fight. There is a spiritual warfare going on. And I really believe there is fixing to be a disclosure from the government with all these UFOs. And part of me writing this is I think that what people think they are is not what they are. And I don't know how far you want me to go down that rabbit trail, but I would encourage your readers to go to the Bible and look for things where God says things happen in the heavens. There are passages, very weird passages in the Bible about signs in the heavens, signs on the earth, signs beneath the earth. Ezekiel, go to Ezekiel, Revelation. There is a spiritual warfare that is fixing to come. I mean, right now we've got the wrath of man on happening in the world, and we see it every day. But we're just seeing the beginning, the beginning. So anyway,
Oh, you're fine. I have heard that some people are kind of relate the Bible to one of the most paranormal books. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think, unfortunately, here in the West, we have tend to take away from the Bible's spirituality. In other words, if we don't understand something, we want to turn to science for the answer. And if you go like to Africa or some of the other countries around the world, they have no problems whatsoever with seeing the spiritual war, or the spiritual, I don't know if they'd call it war, but the spirituality, like they see it in the trees, they see it in nature, they don't have a problem with that. Here in America, it's like if you talk about spiritual things, they want to go to the scientific method where you got to prove it. You got to, and so they've relegated it to, not being real. But I think part of it is they are afraid of it. There's a fear. Because if you recognize that there's a spiritual reality going on, then you have to come to the conclusion, you have to ask the question, how did I get here? And many people, whether it's pride, whether it's just their analytical mind, if they can't make sense of it, then to them it doesn't exist. The thing that I want your readers, your viewers, I write, so I think in this, despite all of the scientific knowledge that we've accumulated over especially the last few years, scientists cannot create living life. They can't create one cell. And I mean, when you stop and think about that, they can't take a rock and make it living. But Jesus was the living rock. You see what I'm saying? Jesus is about life. He's about love. He's about creation. Science can't do that. It can analyze, it can experiment, it can learn, it can do all those things, but it can't create life.
Do you think there's some fear of not believing in what the Bible is saying and what the churches are saying? Like, you need to believe that God can only do this, or this is only things that God can do or Jesus can do, but not thinking that we can do the same things in this day of age. Do you think there's a fear of admitting that in people?
Well, I think part of it is kind of like where I came from. I felt very judged by the church. And so I think in some ways the church has failed people because they're so quick to judge without the grace. Now, there's certain standards, okay? I don't believe you can have 12 different sexes, okay? I mean, God made male and female. So there's certain things that are just non-negotiable. But I think to come and hit people over the head, well, if you don't believe the way my church believes, like you've got to be immersed for baptism. No, that's not a matter of salvation. You see what I'm saying? Sometimes the church can be very argumentative. They can be very unforgiving. And I think that's why I really encourage people read the Bible, because I was saved by reading the Bible. I read the Gospel of Matthew in the King James Version when I was 12 years old. And you know how hard the King James Version is to read. 12 years old, under a light, because my family, if they were Christians, they didn't really show it. They are today. My mom is today. She's amazing today. But church and all that, all it did was create fights. So I was reading under a light in the darkness where nobody knew what I was doing. And once I saw God's love, that was what drew me in. The church is so quick to condemn and not extend God's love. We can love people without agreeing with their point of view. You know what I mean? We can still be loving toward them because God loves them. You know what I mean? There's grace in that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think
it makes sense. Yeah, I get it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think the other thing I would mention is so much today is Democrat versus Republican politics. That's not where the battle is happening. The battle is happening in the heavens between God and Satan. Okay, there's a spiritual battle going on. And I think that people don't appreciate what's happening. There is a war going on overhead. We don't realize how big the battle is. When Jesus came and died on the cross, it was to deal with sin, not just man's sin, but the rebellion that happened in the very beginning when a third of the angels fell. Satan wanted to take God's place. So there was this huge, huge war that happened, and they were cast out. And that has not been totally dealt with yet. That's still to come. So Satan is roaming the earth, stirring up trouble, along with his fallen angels, creating hate. I mean, it's so sad because people, if they would only recognize the battle is not politics, it's what's in the heart. You know what I mean? It's what, like, my neighbors are African American, and I remember when the George Floyd thing happened, I came home and they were pulling my garbage can up to the road, my garbage can. And I leaned out the window and said, I don't care what happens in the world, you will always be my friend because you have a kind heart. And I looked at her and there were tears coming down her eyes. They are
Yeah.
Christians. They go to church. Not that you got to go to church to be a Christian, but they they're loving. I mean, I just see their life. I see how, if you're a Christian, there's neither Jew nor Greek. There's nothing but the love of Jesus. And I think if people could embrace that, but there's a spiritual warfare going on, and it's going to become more and more evident. And I think, the UFOs, they're not what you think they are. They just aren't. They're going to pretend to be something that they aren't, and people are going to think they're coming here to help us. Well, I don't think that's what's happening. And that's a whole nother rabbit trail. But they're being seen now all over the world. And, my book goes into some of that. People want to read about that. They can read about that.
So I hear, yes, there are the good ETs, there's the bad ETs. You hear that. But I hear more of the good is here to help keep Earth from blowing itself up, with war and everything. What are your thoughts with that? That they're helping
Well,
out?
that is
stopping the
that is what
buttons.
I present in my book. Um, but I don't want to reveal too much of the story because I got to write book two. I have to be careful what I say because, I know where I'm going. Um, my stomach is growling. I haven't had dinner. Um, how do I put this? The story, let me put it this way. Between Genesis 1 and Genesis 1:2, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? Then there should be a pause. And the better interpretation is, and the world became formless and void. Okay? So something happened. People call it the gap theory. But I believe when you really do the research, that there was a civilization on earth before mankind, before humans were here. Adam and Eve were the first humans. But I think I think the earth, how do I put this? Time began when sin began. Okay, there's this old earth, new earth. Well, they're both true. Because I believe what happened when Satan fell, that's when time began. Okay, so I think before Satan fell, there could have been billions of years of existence. There was no time. Time didn't exist. Time is linked to sin. Okay, and then after everything has been dealt with after the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ, there's eternity. There's no time in eternity because at that point sin has been dealt with. Sin, the judgment has been had, and then there will be time forever and ever and ever. Okay. So I think what you need to, the way I look at it is there's a third of those angels that are free to roam. And and they still have access to heaven. And I'm totally bypassing the Nephilim and all of that because that's a whole nother trail. I'm going way, way back. Okay.
Right.
The eighth dimension, the beginning and the end. Okay. And so are these UFOs good UFOs? Are they bad UFOs? I think you're going to have to read the book to get.
Yeah,
I get you. I will answer that question, but the question I present, okay, there are three ways that life could have got here on Earth. Okay, creation, evolution, or seeded by, another civilization. But if we were seeded by another civilization, something had to create that civilization. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying, I believe we were Adam and Eve were created, but that doesn't preclude the fact that God could have created other beings throughout the universe. There could be other life on other planets. They're not human. And this is why I believe that humans are the ultimate in God's creation, because God created us in his image. That makes us unique. We are the only living things anywhere in the universe that are created in God's image. Okay? And Jesus is fully human and fully God sitting on the throne. That means we have his image. The image of man is in heaven. So we are the ultimate of his creation, but that doesn't preclude that there could be other beings on other planets, and they could be visiting us or whatever. I'm going to leave that with the reader. They will have to read the next book. Sorry to be cruel, but
Hey, no, you're fine. You're fine.
But I do think that we are fixing to see. Jesus said, when all these things in the heavens begin to happen, look up, your redemption draws near. So I think we're going to see more and more. I know I've been following on YouTube. You can look it up. NASA's following some strange comets that are acting very odd, that seem to be self-propelled. They're not acting like regular comets. My feeling is what we're going to see, and it's going to be supernatural. You think of what happened with Moses and the judgments on Egypt. There was the frogs coming down from heaven. There was just blood red There were just all there was. You can read them. I believe that God is going to use the natural elements to bring about supernatural change. Okay, we're going to start to see things in the sky. Call them UFOs, call them comets, call them whatever you want. I think that we are going to see darkness. And interestingly, one of my books that I wrote is The Night Cometh. Okay, and I knew the title of this book, Frequency, before a year ago, and like everywhere I look now, it's all about frequency. God meets us where we're at. Okay,
Right.
and I think that that's what he wants to do. He wants to meet us where we are at, and we're at a tipping point. Okay, I think God is separating the sheep from the wolves, or the sheep from the goats. I'm sorry, sheep from the goats. A lot of it, I think, is over Israel. I am pro-Israel. I believe that God comes back and he deals with his focus returns to Israel, and we're going to see a mass outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and we're going to see so much supernatural. You have a supernatural show. God obviously must have put it on your heart to have a supernatural, paranormal, because it's coming. It is coming. You're going to see more and more and more of it. You're going to have people that you're going to be blown away by what they're seeing. I look at the death of Charlie Kirk, and I'm thinking, you know what? I bet you he didn't feel anything. God took him before that bullet even hit him, almost like a rapture. You know what I mean? It was so vivid worldwide. I've not seen the video. I'll do everything I can do. I can't handle that kind of stuff. I'm just can't. But I've heard what people have said. I believe it was very prophetic of the rapture coming. I really do, because it was so visible, and the rapture is going to be a visible event that people all around the world are going to realize what was that, and they're going to start looking, and it's going to be supernatural. It's coming. You're right on the cutting edge of what's coming. The question is, where do you go for your information? People, I know they will go to horoscopes, they will go to, different sources, and there is power in that, because there is spiritual power in that. But we don't need to go to those other sources, because God will speak to us if we are tuned into his frequency. When we read the Bible, he will give us his word in supernatural ways. You know, when my husband left me, I've been trying to get pregnant, couldn't get pregnant, and we've been married. I put him through medical school, and as he was getting the remainder of his stuff out of the house, I looked at him and I said to him, "She's pregnant, isn't she?" And he looked down and he wouldn't look me in the eye. I knew. Everyone that knew me, I was going to church at that point, everyone that knew me knew she was pregnant, and no one would tell me. God told me. So I think if you are tuned in to God, he will give you revelations that you have no way of knowing unless God told you that. No way. And I've had it happen in my life over and over and over. Just profound things.
Yeah, that's what the spiritual world would call claircognizance. I don't know if you're familiar with the clairs, but that would be a claircognizance.
I just use a different phrase for it. I feel like God gives me visions. He gives me a word of knowledge. I'm just calling it by a name that I feel more comfortable, because I want to give him I give him all of the credit, because yeah, in my own strength, I'm just a warrior, and I go down anyway. I don't, by the grace of God, I
Practicing.
am what I am. I need him.
Good. It's all good. Everybody has their different phrases for different
Wow.
things. And it's it's really interesting how everyone has something the same, but it's just different, but it's really, really interesting how everything goes about.
God, God just knows us. He knows us to the core. He knows our heart, and He loves. I think the one thing that we don't realize is just how much God loves us. You know, we have no idea how much He loves us. And even though we're sinners to the core, and even though we come up short, and every once in a while I'll say a word I shouldn't have said, or you know, like God loves us anyway, you know.
Yeah.
And I see
Right.
that more and more, because now I'm like, God, can you simple things like, God, I can't get this pool pump thing to do what it's supposed, you know, I can't. And it's like, can you help me? And then it works. I'm like, even the simple, even the things that are really not spiritual, it's like, because you know, I've been single for like 40, yeah, like decades. Okay. I adopted my two children as a single mother. And the miraculousness of it would, if you read my first book, it'll blow you away. And like, people, when they write my memoir, when they read some of my memoir books, like about my animals and about my daughters when I adopted them, they think, this can't be true. This is too weird. And then when I write fiction, because I write both, they think, is this true?
It's a crazy world. That's how I got started with the podcast, to be honest. Um, I'm just standing there in my living room and I heard the word podcast. And I barely even was
Believe it.
even listening to a podcast. So I had no idea what I was doing. I'm getting much better now, I think. But it's still, it shocks me to think a word is said to me and then what was it, like 2 months later I had my show. A month or two later I had my first show. I was like, it was crazy.
It is crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, you know, oh, if we only appreciated he just loves us so much. And I think, you know, if people like, just get a Bible, start reading, because I get it. You know, Christians can be very offensive. You know, um,
Yeah.
and I just, we just need to extend grace, love. Um, but we're going to start seeing, like, getting back to the supernatural, and we are going to start seeing more and more of it, more and more of it, things that you can't explain, whether it's in the sky. You know, I recently watched a video about scientists studying dolphins, and they're using AI now to help decipher their, because they have a very complicated way with echoing and sounds and everything. They've been studying dolphins for decades, trying to understand what they're saying, and they're using AI now and AI, it's amazing. AI said the dolphins remember way, way back. They remember back to the flood, and it's in their DNA. It's in the way they communicate. And I got to thinking, that blew my mind. These are scientists
So
that are,
here's a question. So if AI is around because of AI programs, or I'm sorry, humans program AI.
right.
So how do they get that information to know what a dolphin's saying?
Woo, you have just opened a hornet's nest. Do you really want me to tell you my opinion? Woo. Okay, get ready. Okay, you go back to Adam and Eve, and you go back to Cain and Abel, and they knew, in other words, Adam and Eve at that time in the garden, heaven and earth were connected. Okay, they weren't separate. You know, there was a divine council. Study Dr. Michael Heiser if you want to know more about I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Adam and Eve were in that divine council, okay, because it was all joined, okay? And even the fallen angels, they were still in, there was this divine council, okay, that ran the universe, all right? God likes to allocate. There are different levels, of angels. I mean, this is all documented. I'm not an expert on it, but God is a God of order, not of chaos. Well, when Adam and Eve sinned, the separation happened between heaven and earth. Okay, Adam and Eve had that knowledge that we no longer have. Okay, they weren't, when they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I mean, anyway, kind of like it was where Satan was trying to get them away from God. Okay, and they fell for it. I mean, Eve was deceived, and Adam followed suit. So at that point, they could no longer live forever because they had that knowledge of evil. Before that, they didn't have the knowledge of evil. Okay, that was given to them. So they had this knowledge from when heaven and earth were joined. Okay, they shared that knowledge with Cain and with Seth. Okay, I am going somewhere with this. Okay, that knowledge was probably handed down. Okay. You read in the book of Enoch. I know Enoch is not at the same level of scripture, but it's got a lot of very helpful information that is validated in the Bible. So let me see if I can move this along. Okay, so this knowledge was hidden knowledge that goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Okay, well, what happened after that. There was like sin, wickedness, that it was just a horrible place, the Nephilim, and all of that. It was just a horrible place. Okay, and so God sent Noah, to build the ark, and wanted to get rid of all of the wickedness. Okay, because remember, that wickedness, that knowledge came from Adam and Eve. Okay, they had that knowledge. And so where did that knowledge go? Okay, when the flood happened, I believe, and I'm not, this isn't original with me, I don't have citations handy, but they stored that knowledge on Noah's Ark. Okay, they weren't going to just, they wanted that knowledge. Okay, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. One of those sons was ended up not being a good person. Okay, he probably is the one. He took that knowledge of good and evil. Okay, and he used it, because if you look down at the lineage of him, Nimrod, how did they, like, Nimrod became a great one. Okay, where I'm going with this is the knowledge, when the flood happened, okay, the Nephilim, for the most part, were dealt with. Some remained. They weren't all, they're giants, in the Bible, but it helped to cut back on the evilness, okay? But there was knowledge. There were knowledge, and Nimrod had that knowledge, okay? Esau, anyway, the point I'm getting at, this is so complicated. That's why I said you really asked a very complicated. That knowledge has continued. In other words, if you look at Egypt, you look at Samaria, those languages and those civilizations, they had their history written before Moses wrote the Bible. Okay, God dictated to Moses things that had happened way in the past. But it's a different point of view. If you read Egyptian and Sumerian stuff, they worshiped those gods. Those gods were the fallen angels. Those mythical characters Hercules and all these guys, they were the fallen angels. Okay? Remember when Nimrod, God assigned angels to govern the earth, and then when they wanted the worship for themselves, God gave them over, and then he pulled Abraham out of the land of Ur and said, my blessing will be with you. Because Abraham wasn't Jewish,
Yeah.
but he was worshiping God. The point I'm trying to make is this hidden knowledge has been passed down generation after generation. And now it is hidden with groups like the Freemasons, like the Illuminati. They have that hidden knowledge, and that's why there's power in that hidden knowledge. Okay? And that's why they want to suppress Christianity, because they want the power. New World Order, all of these different groups that are globalist, they have that, they're getting their power. Yes, where are they getting they're getting it from the hidden knowledge that originated way back in the beginning, that has been handed down generation after generation after generation. That knowledge is still here. But the thing is God does that. Okay? God, that's why people don't realize the battle is so much bigger. Okay? Because Satan thinks he can still win. And this is why the Jewish people are so important in the end times, because Jesus said, I will not come back until the Jewish leadership says, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So until the Jewish leadership realizes that Jesus was their Messiah and is their Messiah, Jesus cannot come back. So if Satan can suppress the truth of who Jesus was, he thinks he can't, but he believes he can win the battle. Because when Adam and Eve sinned, he took over the deed to earth. Jesus won it back at the cross, but he hasn't taken it in his hand. Because remember, in the book of Revelation, it says where they were trying to find someone that could open the scroll, and they were crying because nobody could find it. That is the title deed to the earth. That's when Jesus takes the scroll and opens it. Okay. Does that make sense? I hope I'm making sense. It's very complicated, and people don't understand that there is, and what's so sad is there's power in blood, okay? Power of Jesus in his blood, but there's also power in innocent blood. And the fallen angels and that whole realm, that's why they have these very perverted ceremonial things that they do, because they're trying to increase their power. That's what's so dangerous, like about Halloween and all of this. That's what's wrong with abortion. Is you're sacrificing a child, just like what they did in the Bible with the occult, occult activities that happen with, the tribes, the tribal groups that surrounded Israel. That's why God didn't want them to intermarry, because he knew that they would be tempted, because there were fallen angels. They had power. Solomon, I mean, look at him. He went after those, and anyway, people don't realize there is power in the occult. That's why you need to stay away from it. And that power goes all the way back to the very beginning, to Adam and Eve, when they had that knowledge and they passed it down. And then the Egyptians and the Sumerians, they started worshiping the fallen angels and called them gods. I used to think it was all made up. When I homeschooled, I thought, oh, that's just poppycock. But think about it for a minute. Are people that stupid? No, they're not that stupid. They had power. Those fallen angels had power. But that's why God came along and wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, to set the record straight. You see, because it's written, these were wicked, wicked gods. Okay, they were fallen angels.
Yeah.
And they wanted to be worshipped. You talk about supernatural. Hey, this is supernatural. No. I'm serious. I am not making this stuff up. I have done hundreds of hours of research on this. And that's why I'm writing it the way I'm writing it, because if I Christians, they would throw me out off the bridge. I'm like, she's crazy. So I wrote it in this way so that I want people to go and do their own research. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, we're running out of time. We are running out of time. I mean, people say, oh, this has been going on for a long time. They didn't have AI. We haven't had the power to destroy the earth 10 times over. I mean, we didn't have the internet and instant communication to where someone like Charlie Kirk could be killed and everyone would see
Watch it. Yeah.
and it's just evil, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
AI can be used for good. I'm not saying it can't be used for good. It is being used for good. But where is the compass, the moral compass? These scientists, let me tell you, my ex-husband was a doctor. They have big egos, okay? And if they can come up with the next big thing, they don't have the moral compass, in my opinion, to put the brakes on, because they want that glorification for themselves. They're not doing it for the glory of God.
Yeah.
They're prideful. You know what I mean? And I mean, I'm not saying every single one, but I live in, you know, University of Florida is just down the street from me. And brilliant people, but they have egos. And it's like, if you don't publish, you perish. Okay, I could just go on and on. I get very passionate about this because people just don't connect the dots. You know, they're brilliant people, but they haven't. And I think I would encourage your listeners, look at Dr. Michael Heiser's work. He's no longer with us. He's gone to be with the Lord, but look at what he wrote, because that is really, and that was kind of a supernatural thing in itself, be finding out about him. Man, I have so many supernatural stories, but anyway, I won't go down that rabbit trail. But anyway, does that answer your question? Like, how do they get the power? They get the power because these occultists are communicating with these fallen angels. You look at Hitler, okay? He had occultists behind him, you know? And all he did was steal symbols that were old. Like, for instance, that Nazi symbol, the cross, the perverted cross. When I went to Nepal in 2015, I was there at one of the major Hindu festivals, and all around they were drawing that Nazi. I mean, to me, it was a Nazi cross. And I'm like, I asked my missionary friend, he was a pastor, and he found my daughter, who went back, and we took Christian books to Kathmandu and going around, and we're seeing all these Nazi symbols. I'm like, what's that about? He said, Hitler stole it. He stole the symbol. What didn't mean what Hitler meant for it to mean. It wasn't a Christian symbol per se, but it was a positive symbol. And so that's what the occultists do. They steal. Look at the rainbow. What do they use in the rainbow? I mean, everything gets reused so that Satan can steer people into, like, on his side. The battle is so big. It is not just, you know, going to church. It is going to church and believing in Jesus, but God wants us for all eternity. God wanted a family on earth. He had his family in heaven. He had his angels. He wanted a family on earth. He loved us. Anyway.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. That is awesome. We are running out of time here, but yeah, it's a lot of information, a lot of things to be thinking about. I think it was great presentation
All right. Well,
of how you did that. So
the one thing, I homeschooled my daughters, and I said the one thing, the cardinal sin of homeschooling is to make it boring. So the last thing I want to do is bore your listeners. So if nothing else, maybe they listened, and maybe I can get them to kind of think about these things, because I definitely present things in a different way. You probably have to look far and wide to find someone that would say these things.
no, you're fine. I mean, you're doing a great job, and yeah, you've given a lot of information and a lot of questions to be brought up. I'm sure um, my viewers will have a lot of questions, and if you guys do have questions, write them down.
Yeah.
You can
Oh,
always
go
contact
to
her,
my
and
web. They can go to my website. It's just my name, Lorilyn Roberts, Lorilyn Roberts.com. All of my books are there. I've got hundreds of blog posts there. I have, 20, I've contributed or written 20 books. And if they want to communicate with me, there's a place on my website they can go and leave me a message.
we'll put that information in the notes below too, so that they can get a hold of you and all of that. So that'll be awesome. That'll be awesome. But thank you so much for being on the
Thank you for
show.
having me on. I think you've hit a nerve, and I hope that people will find you and um, you know, I anyway, I appreciate you letting me kind of share. I like that freedom. So thank you.
Yeah. No, no problem, no problem. You had like a little bit of a twist into this information, and it was a beautiful twist, and um I enjoyed it. I enjoyed hearing those different twists and everything, and I think my guests will, or my subscribers will too. So, yeah. So, if you want to come back and talk some more about some of these experiences, or when your next book comes out,
My next book
um,
comes out, I'll have a little more freedom, and I can go a little more into stuff. Some stuff I kind of had to hold back and I am going to write it. I write pretty quickly. I hope to have the first draft done by December. So hopefully January, I can get it out. So not long.
yeah,
It won't be
not
that
long at
long.
all. Not long at all. So yeah, you're welcome to come back if you ever wanted to, and talk about your second book. Um, so yeah. But thank you again for
All
being
right.
on
Well,
the
thank you.
show.
Thank
You
you.
were awesome.
Bye
You were
bye.
awesome. All right, we'll see ya. If anyone else out there has any stories you would like to share, email me at lighttalk423@gmail.com, and we will get you on the show. All right, we'll talk to everybody next time.
Bye
Bye.
bye.